This is PNC Roundtable.
Hello, this is Ric DeVore, Regional President for PNC Bank, and thank you for listening to PNC Roundtable. It's on this show that we tackle some of the region's tough issues with people who make a difference.
Now here's the PNC Roundtable.
Welcome into our PNC Roundtable. Hi, this is Paul W. Smith, along with PNC Regional President Ric DeVore. And today a conversation with Tonya Allen, President and CEO of the Skillman Foundation, and Pastor Larry Simmons, Executive Director, Brightmoor Alliance. You've put another group together today, Rick, that's pretty interesting and very important.
No, it really is. And as you know, we've had Tonya on the show before. And, I kid around with Tonya that, sometimes we think that Skillman is the good housekeeping seal of approval. If we're doing something with Skillman, we're doing something right. So we're really excited about it. And I go way back with Reverend Simmons, so I think this can be a great show.
Well, I think that there's a lot to talk about here, and it's a broad-based effort. There's no question about it. Tonya, a group of organizations got together recently to announce a $1.5 million initiative called Say and Play with Words. Tell us a little bit about the program and who is involved.
Well, thanks, Paul, and thank you, Rick, for having us. It's always a great opportunity to be able to talk about the good work that's happening in Detroit's neighborhoods. So this partnership is basically working in two neighborhoods in Brightmoor and Southwest Detroit, and what we're attempting to do is increase the number of words and the interaction of words with young children, and we believe that if we do that and we do it really well, that we will see the academic gains for our students across the board. So what we're really trying to do is infuse these neighborhoods with vocabulary words, with words that they can see, interact with, and we know that that will lead to stronger literacy levels as they grow older.
Well, Rick, you have a long history at PNC of supporting early childhood education. I think I said a long while ago it's in PNC's DNA. But this vocabulary initiative, I think, is fairly new. Why the focus on improving the vocabularies of underserved preschool kids?
Well, first of all, Paul, this was done really in celebration of our 10th year with Grow Up Great. So as certain communities, there's 10 of us, that received a grant from the PNC Foundation to do this in celebration of 10 years. With that said, we decided to try to partner with some groups that we have done this kind of work with before, and Brightmoor Alliance, Southwest Solutions, obviously Skillman, and then the Max and Marjorie Fisher Foundation. But really what this gets at, and there's a little difference here, is this 30 million word gap, that children from more affluent areas have a $30 million word. 30
million word
Right.
difference?
In other words, they hear 30 million more words by the time they start kindergarten than children in underserved. But what's really unique and what I'm really excited about this is it's kind of a on-the-ground approach. We're really working with neighborhood groups in both those communities, people that are doing it every day on the ground, whether these are people like Brightmoor Alliance or Southwest Solutions, really focusing on what I kind of call the boots on the ground, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Boots on the ground. And speaking of boots on the ground, Reverend Larry Simmons, Executive Director, Brightmoor Alliance, this initiative is focusing on the Brightmoor and Southwest Detroit communities. And how did you bring this about?
Well, we've been blessed to have the support of phenomenal foundations who have helped the grassroots efforts of our communities. Both Skillman and the Max and Marjorie Fisher Foundations have been pouring not just financial but talent resources into our communities. And as a result, we have a network now in Brightmoor of early childhood providers called Rising, which involves more than 25 early childhood providers. And they have elevated the qualifications of the workers in those providers so that almost now all of them are licensed and certified home and center providers. So it is individuals who are working literally at the block level, boarding up houses, cutting vacant lots, planting gardens, that blend together to work with PNC. And PNC has been a phenomenal partner in this work, both with the Alliance directly, they're our banker, and they also help us to open literacy at many levels levels, both financial as well as verbal literacy. So it's this partnership, this network of partnership that is so exciting and helps to change the metric for our communities.
Tonya, I have a question for you. This is a first for PNC, not going it alone, i.e., actually having two partners. Can you maybe elaborate on why this is important to you and to Skillman? Sure.
Well, one, it gives us an opportunity to work with PNC, which is always a great pleasure, as well as with our long-term partner, the Max and Marjorie Fisher Foundation. And it gives us an opportunity to really integrate what work has already been existing in these neighborhoods. So as Larry just indicated, the work that they've been doing in Brightmoor to strengthen early childhood has been a significant advancement. And we've seen this also in Southwest Detroit. So with Southwest Solutions, Congress of Communities, which are our partners on the ground there, they have been running community events as well as specific programming for young families to make sure that they increase literacy, that we're doing the proper things around early childhood and early brain development. And so it's really important to us as a foundation that we try and figure out not only how to do this at the programmatic level, but how we infuse this in a community in a broad way. We want these communities to really embrace literacy, embrace and understand how they can support at every single level and every single community meeting place how you improve literacy.
I understand it's important to the Skillman Foundation. That goes without saying. I hope it's not a hard sell or hard for you to sell to show the community how important it is.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think the community really owns this, but I really believe that they don't always have the opportunity to spread this across the way that they would like to. And I think these resources really enable them to do so. And I think in partnership with these three foundations who are also bringing resources and research to the table, I think it just enhances what already exists in the community. And I think that's what makes this effort so special. It's not us doing something to communities. It's really about us working collaboratively in a way that's going to help advance the academic achievement of our youngest children.
Reverend, you're dying to say something. I want you to say
yes,
it.
You know how you exclaimed when you heard about the 30 million word gap?
Mm-hmm.
I think at the community level, I think people have been unaware that this gap existed, because if you live in Brightmoor and you work in the nearby community and you're not interacting with people in the broader community, you're unaware that your children don't possess the same vocabulary. And so part of the work that's happened in Brightmoor is that all of the school governance, every school in Brightmoor, every principal has come to what we call the principal's table. And so we have EAA schools, we have DPS schools, we have every charter school who all work together. In fact, we've just started a new partnership with Cranbrook schools in which 3,000 kids are going to be transported from Brightmoor on a regular basis with their families, so they get to experience the science and art museums there. I'm bringing this up in relationship to this because part of the way you develop vocabulary is to have broader experience. So when I see things that I'm unfamiliar with, I have to develop vocabulary, words, to describe and identify those things. Those things then become intellectual constructs, which I can then apply to other situations. So if I say to somebody, I'm angry as a grizzly bear, after you've seen that grizzly bear up at Cranbrook, it has a whole new meaning.
You know, and Paul, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that it's being done also in Spanish in Southwest Detroit.
Yes.
And so if you think of Southwest Detroit, one of the vocabulary words could be the Ambassador Bridge, because that's something that I think resonates with people in that area. That might not be as powerful in Brightmoor, right? Because that would not be something that those children would maybe be exposed to. So what's really unique about this is really getting down to this grassroots level, if you will. And you heard Reverend Simmons talk about that, of the caregivers, the principals, the teachers, everybody, versus why don't you come into our office in Troy and we'll tell you how to do this, right? That wouldn't probably work too well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to call upon both you, Reverend Larry, and you, Tonya, to talk about why it's so important to begin this program while the kids are still in preschool. and to answer to the people who say, well, wait a minute, it doesn't have to start in preschool. It can happen. They got plenty of time to catch up while they're in school. Not the case.
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolutely not the case. And as Rick articulated, 30 million words. The 30 million words is before the age 5. So we can't wait until they're 5 to catch up on the 30 million words. We have to catch it up immediately when they're born. And what we know from brain science is that kids' minds develop really early. They can absorb as much as we give them. And so it's really important that we give them as much exposure as possible in the early ages. And once we do that, it puts them on track to be a stronger reader later in their lives. It's not that you cannot do it, but it's always, you can't prepare them to be stronger readers later, but it's always better to do preventative work versus remediation. And this is really a way to strengthen our broader community. So as we're increasing the literacy of young people, we're also increasing the literacy of teens, adults, everybody in those communities. And there's nothing but good that comes from that.
Reverend Larry?
Yes, I want to just absolutely amen what Tonya just said. All of the research that we are now seeing in human development points to the tremendously pivotal period between conception and 3 years old, and certainly by 5. And that research says that the more a young person is exposed to language, is adequately nourished, the far greater chances they have long-term for life consequences. And as phenomenal as it may sound, this includes things like being able to provide for yourself, not being on assistance, not committing crime or going to prison. All of those things actually begin in those early years. And so to the degree, as I mentioned, about the experiences, one of the things that middle-class families provide for their children that poor families don't for lots of reasons are a multitude of experiences. They go on vacations to different places. They visit museums that may cost money or be difficult to reach. By bringing this program to places like the Brightmoor community, like Development Centers is doing with its outreach to its clients, what we do is we bring this language to people and help children come to understand the difference between being hungry and voracious. Those kinds of moments strengthen their intellectual muscles. So as they develop this, they'll start to develop their own capacity to develop and identify things that need language, and that starts early. Literally, children. There's research now that says children actually understand from the moment they are born. They just take a while before they can articulate in words. We've all had the experience of a young child going on and gesturing and meaning something, but we just can't figure out what it is. That child is actually processing language and is learning the language, the words, the sounds that we use. Early is absolutely essential.
Larry, this is Rick. I have a question for you. You mentioned the grizzly bear at Cranbrook.
Yeah.
So let's just say that you're with a bunch of families and you're at Cranbrook, and obviously we've talked about why this is so vital to children from underserved communities. If a family comes up to you and approaches you from, say, the Cranbrook community or a more affluent family, what would your answer be to why they should care about this kind of initiative that we're doing in Brightmoor and Southwest?
That's a good question.
We are inextricably bound together. Those of us who've had the privilege of travel know when you leave this area, if you tell someone you're from Birmingham or Bloomfield Hills or Westland, they're going to kind of look at you with the glazed overlook. But the minute you say, I'm from Detroit, they know about where you're from, and they have an opinion about you and where you live. It's essential both for our reputation that we begin to work together to uplift everyone. Second reason, economically, it has been shown. Fisher has done a study, partnered with, and I'm blocking on the name of the group, has partnered with a group to show that the more we invest early in a child's life, it literally saves hundreds of millions of dollars to the general community for compensatory education. As Tonya pointed out a few minutes ago, is extraordinarily, I mean, these numbers are so big it's hard to believe, but universities and serious researchers have validated this, that the more we invest, the small money we invest early pays huge dividends later. So it will reduce the cost of government for those who are affluent or doing well. It will improve the reputation of the region as the poorest of our communities begin to thrive. And lastly, it will lower some of the tensions that have existed historically in this region as we begin to see one another as being more alike than we are different.
Excellent. I mean, there's no question we're all in this together. It is, again, one of those win-win-win circumstances for all of us. And I suspect there are people who would be very interested in volunteering to help this effort. I hope that that's a possibility, and I'll ask both you, Reverend Larry, and Tonya about that.
Absolutely. So we need as many caring adults and the caring power of southeastern Michigan involved as we can. And so we have 4 community organizations that are partnering with us: Development Centers, Brightmoor Alliance, Southwest Solution, and Congress of Communities. Each of those organizations are looking for volunteers. There are lots of ways that you can volunteer, from helping with events to reading in classrooms to donating books. So there are lots of ways that you can play a role, regardless if you want to spend a lot of time or a small amount of time. Your investment is worthy and needed.
Reverend, you want to add something to that?
Yes. As you know, our children are very media driven. And one of the great parts of this program is that it approaches vocabulary through a multi-channel approach. It'll include billboards, hopefully TV commercials, posters, which we will have at our various community meetings, like we have in Brightmoor every month, and I know Southwest has as well. It will include social media. I'm learning some of this. Instagram, I knew about Facebook, but there's something called Snapchat, and a couple of others that I don't know yet. But we are going to be approaching this language question for the parents to get them to begin to use words, and for the children to hear these words. Because if you ever, I know we've all seen this, young people will be sitting right next to each other. They don't talk, they just text one another.
Right.
So we will be using all of those venues, all of those channels to emphasize the importance of vocabulary and working with our children.
Reverend, you and Tonya and you, Rick, all participated in the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children, which you spearheaded, Tonya. Can you give us an update on that effort?
Sure. Well, we, as you know, we assembled a large group of community members, and we spent about 100 days together going deep in all of the issues around education and put together a pretty broad reform plan that we look at as partially the triage work that we'll need in order to improve our education system, understanding that we'll need 10 years more of committed investment and a focused effort to really improve the quality of schools. We submitted those recommendations to the governor and expecting him to come back with some plan of his own and to also integrate that into legislation. We, I think every month we thought it was going to be introduced, but what we hear is that it's going to be introduced at early December, and we're really hoping that the legislature really thinks about this and figures out a way on how we solve this problem of education in Detroit. We have big quality issues in the city of Detroit around schools. We also have challenges with supply and demand. So
are these your core points, basically, that you made?
Well, yeah, those are some of those. And then we also have to resolve this debt challenge that the district has had. So right now, the Detroit Public Schools serves half of the school students in the city, and each of those students pay about $1,200 off of their backs, off of their per pupil allocation to pay for the debt that's been accumulated over the last 15 years while it's been in both the state and local control. And that's just not, it's unfathomable. We cannot allow children to pay for the bad decisions of adults.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I would just add that I believe at the community level, as I've spoken with people about this, and I've spoken now probably to about 10 groups, both of ministers and block club leaders and block club members, there is a very real and palpable commitment to wanting to turn this around. And while I know many have been critical of various parts of the proposal, my challenge to everyone is, if this is not the solution, what is yours? Because I believe, based on the experts who we were blessed to bring in under the leadership of our co-chairs, we saw a snapshot of education across the United States, and clearly this set of recommendations embraces the best practice of across this country. And so for all of those who would suggest that this is not the answer, I challenge you, step forward with the better plan. We are advocating this because we believe it is the best, based on best practice and based on expert testimony. Let's get it done. Our children in our region and state need it.
Look, we're all aware that Detroit continues to make huge strides economically, in infrastructure. The street lights are back on, blight reduction, M1 rail. There's a long list. We know that. And yet, a part of any high-functioning society involves having good schools. What issues do we face down the line if we don't provide a quality education to the generation of kids currently in the city school system? Rick, you go first.
Well, I think, I'm a big fan of what's happened in Detroit, but I really don't think this renaissance will really be complete until we deal with this issue with education. And I think right now you see that when family formation happens, people either go private school or they move out of Detroit. And I keep saying the same thing, they take their tax base with them. So I really think this is the last leg of the puzzle, and I know Tonya's heard me say this many times. I actually said this Wednesday night, but wouldn't it be great if we got a grand bargain for the children? I mean, and I'm not making light of what happened here. It's revolutionary in terms of what the two judges and the city did with the foundations. But why can't we now take that success and demonstrate it for children who don't vote and many times don't have a voice? And Reverend Simmons said it. I mean, sometimes it's adults misbehaving that the children pay the consequences. So
no question about that.
A lot of work to be done. I'm not trivializing it, but I really think that's the biggest issue we have on the table going forward, besides these beautiful roads. But
we don't have a successful city or successful state without successful schools. I mean, that's the bottom line. Right. You can spend all the money you want on buildings and infrastructure, which has to be done.
Yes.
But if we don't offer good schools, we aren't going to keep people around here, let alone bring them in. It's not going to happen.
Denver did it, as an example.
Yeah,
and I would point out, Paul W., just on the economic side, we know about the tremendous shortage of middle-skilled workers, those workers who require greater than high school but maybe less than a 4-year degree. That is all predicated on a good, solid pre-K to 12 education. And it's not really just Detroit. The title of our report is Great Education for the State Begins in Detroit. But our entire state has, in fact, been suffering over the last several years, several decades. And for the entire state to move, the recommendations that we make around academics, class size, wraparound services, there's a great deal of attention focused upon the finances, and that's always important. But really, it's a broad recommendation that goes all the way from the classroom to the principal's office up to the superintendency. That set says children should graduate with the expectation that they can leave school and compete in the economy with the proper training. We think this is essential for that. Otherwise, as that skill gap grows, businesses cease to look to us as a place to locate.
Yeah, well put, Reverend. Tonya,
Right.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, a couple things I would add to it is that, education is extraordinarily political, and we have we're staunch in debates that really don't benefit children. And I think it's time for us to push away from that. And we have to really think about practical, pragmatic solutions that are going to help us get from today until tomorrow, and what we need to have happen around schools. A couple things I would just say related to that is that I think it's really important that as a community we have to lean in. So we've had essentially no local engagement in schools for the last 10 to 15 years. And so we really have to have the agency of Detroiters engaged in what's happening in the school system and really pushing for the changes and not just fighting against what's happening to them.
When you say we've had no local engagement, further explain that for me.
So, for example, over the course of the last 15 years, except for a few years, we've only had local elections for school boards that will have mattered. Our charter schools are determined by 14 different entities outside of the city of Detroit. And then the EAA is a state entity. So basically, all of our kids who are going to school in the city of Detroit, there is no local management or local involvement. And so this isn't just about a control issue. I think it's an agency issue, that if we really want people to care about education and to ensure that education is effective, then they are going to have a voice, and they also have to have responsibility in making it better. And I think that that's been absent from our community. I also think that we have a really strong and generous corporate community, and they all are invested in small ways across these school systems. And I think we're going to have to figure out how we bring that together to have some coherence if we're really going to drive towards metrics and results that will show that our children can compete with any other children in the world.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if how deep you were going in this. I didn't know if you were talking also about parental involvement.
Yeah, I'm talking about it all. I'm talking about every single way that Detroiters ought to engage, from parents to school teachers to school board members. All of those people have been disempowered over the last 15 years, and we got to figure out a way to get them engaged, get their voices, get their will increased so that we can improve schools for children. This is not a singular approach. There's no one thing we can do that'll make this better. It's going to really require a community pulling together to make the difference.
Reverend Larry or Rick, either of you want to weigh in on that?
I would just say that Say and Play is an example of the broad-based effort around our children. What Tonya says about this, I know I have this very young-sounding voice, and you can't tell that I'm 68 years old, but I'm an old dude.
You do have a young-sounding voice, Reverend.
Thanks, Paul. You're very kind.
I think when you do your sermon, you should do it over the phone.
And I have been involved in the effort around school reform for most of my life, and I will say without hesitancy that I believe most parents in most neighborhoods have operated under the presumption they could send their children into the building and that some magic would happen for them in that building with which they did not need to be intimately involved. And their children would come out ready to do all the great things that every parent has envisioned for their child. What we now know today, and what we are pushing in Brightmoor and in Southwest, and Skillman is helping us to push around the city, as does PNC Bank with its Grow Great program, is that parents can never leave the table. And I would say that parents are the first up on the accountability scale. Parents have to take responsibility and to observe and keep watch over their children's education and to participate. All of this, in fact, is part of our recommendations. That's why, again, I challenge anyone who disagrees with them. Please tell me what you would do differently. That best practice in research, not just somebody's opinion sitting around the lunchroom or at the restaurant. What does research tell you is better than what has been suggested in this proposal?
All right. And finally, Say and Play with Words is a 2-year program with a lot of moving parts. How are we going to measure success, Tonya?
I think the first thing we're going to do is measure the number of words that kids are becoming engaged with. And the second thing is to look at how kids are ready for school in a different way. So we can tell by kindergartner readiness whether kids have had more exposure to words, more exposures to experiences. And that will set us on a trajectory to really not only transform the lives of these children, but also to transform the lives of these school systems that they're going into.
Reverend?
I just want to thank you, Paul, and I'm going to thank you, Rick, for this opportunity to talk about education and young children in Detroit and the state. I will say to you, and Paul said it very well, I don't care how many buildings and how many rails we put up. If we don't build a railroad of education to opportunity for our families and children, all of this is going to fall off the rails, and we're going to be worse than when we started. So I want to commend you for doing what happens too seldom, and that is paying attention to this issue. Thank you both for your investment and for the time you've given us to inform the region about what's going on.
Kind of you to say, and we thank you, Pastor Larry Simmons, Executive Director of Brightmoor Alliance, and of course, Tonya Allen, President and CEO of the Skillman Foundation. And as always, the final word goes to our PNC Regional President and co-host, Ric DeVore.
I'll tell you, Paul, as you know, I'm blessed to work for a company that gives us this kind of support. But I want to thank, real quickly here, Rob Darmanin, Gina Coleman, and Nicole Mattioli on my staff, because they gave genesis to this idea of, hey, why can't we make this better, and why can't we partner with other people? And that's kind of our history in this region. Take a good idea, but make it more like Detroit-ize it, if you will. Make it fit the community. And also, who are the players out there? And clearly the people in both, all the partners that we have, we've been blessed to work with before, but we know that we can, if we pool our resources, we can do something better. So this really is probably one of our shining examples of cooperation interagency. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this was actually Sean Wilson's idea. I saw Sean the other day, and as you know, he's
The mayor.
The mayor, yeah. And he was the one that first came to me and said, hey, how about if we partner with people? And so then my staff took it and ran
now
with it.
we know the rest
Absolutely.
of the story. And that's going to do it for this PNC Roundtable. Thank you, Reverend Larry Simmons, Executive Director of Brightmoor Alliance. Thank you again, Tonya Allen, President and CEO of the Skillman Foundation. And thanks to our co-host and the guy who underwrites the whole thing, PNC Regional President Ric DeVore. For the entire team here, we'll see you in the mornings, 5:30 till 9 on WJR. Regards, Paul W. Smith.